Now, welcome to this video. It's all about homeostasis. So first of all, let's have a look at the definition. So homeostasis means maintaining a constant internal environment. Oops, sorry. So it means basically keeping things the same. So constant means keeping things the same. So for example, our temperature we need to keep as close as we can to 37.5 degrees C. We need to keep our blood sugar levels around about constant. The blood sugar is glucose. And the other thing is our water levels in our blood need to be kept constant. Now, in this video, I'm going to touch on temperature in detail. The water you will find in the kidney video. Okay, and then the blood sugar links to diabetes. All right, so have a look at that video for that one. But this video focuses mostly on temperature. Now, it's keeping your internal environment constant, so it's keeping your internal temperature constant that we're going to look at the most. Now, the reason why our bodies need to be 37.5 degrees is mostly for the need of our enzymes. Now, our enzymes have an optimum temperature of about 37.5 degrees, and too high, they'll denature, too low, reactions happen too slowly. So, we need our temperature in our core body to be about that. So, let's have a look at the processes that make up homeostasis. So the biggest one that we'll come across is negative feedback. Negative feedback can be shown on a graph. So what negative feedback means is that when something in your body starts to increase away from what it should be, so this line is what it should be, we call that either the set point or the norm. So if something deviates away from that, we detect that it's too high and we put in mechanisms that bring it back down to where it should be. Now, the likelihood is that it will overshoot, and then something in our body needs to detect that it's too low and bring it back to where it should be. And it's likely it'll overshoot and it'll go too high again. But we've got this constant cycle. Now, when it goes up too high, that's detected by receptors, and the receptors send a signal to the control center, and the control center sends the signal to the effectors, and the effectors cause a change which cause it to come back down. And the same thing happens at the lower end as well. So the change is detected, first of all, by the effectors. The effectors send a signal to the control center. The control center sends a signal to the effectors, and the effectors bring about the change that causes it to increase back up to the norm. So we're always trying to get it on this normal. So for temperature, the set point we're aiming for is about 37 degrees C or 37.5 degrees C. Okay, and it's always going to be made up of those, and that makes up our negative feedback loop. So negative feedback, if you wanted to write a definition of it, it means when there's a change away from the normal set point, corrective processes take place to return the change back to normal. It's quite long, isn't it? But at least you've got a definition then, okay? So we can usually show homeostasis in a graph like this, but that's the definition. When there's a change away from the normal set point, corrective processes take place to return the change back to normal. And it's always shown with this graph. Now, when we say that we're keeping our blood sugar constant or a temperature constant or our water levels constant, we're actually not keeping them constant. We're keeping them within a very narrow range. So the top here is only going to be like 37.6 and down here is going to be 37.4 or something. So it's barely going above and below because this system of negative feedback works so well. If the temperature was able to go really far from the set point, from the norm, like right up to 40, then that would then be dangerous. But because it's only got such tiny fluctuations, it's within a really safe range. And that's really important. That's the purpose of homeostasis. We say it keeps it constant, but the reality is that we keep it within a very narrow range, which is a safe range for us to exist. So if we were specifically looking at temperature, the homeostasis of temperature, we can add more specific examples onto our graph. So if this line here is our set point at 37.5 degrees, let's have a look at what happens when our temperature goes too high and what happens to bring it back down. So we look at this kind of top end of the graph. So first of all, what are the receptors called? So it's going to be the same as what we did on the other slide, but it's just going to be more detail. Okay, so if your temperature starts to go too high, the receptors that detect temperature are called thermoreceptors. And the thermoreceptors are found in your skin and in your hypothalamus. Now, your hypothalamus is a part right at the bottom of your brain, and we'll talk about the hypothalamus quite a lot in this topic. Hypothalamus. So thermoreceptors, so rather than just saying receptors detect it, thermoreceptors detect it, and they're found in the skin and the hypothalamus, and they detect that the temperature has gone above 37.5. Now that signal needs to be sent to a control center. Now this control center for temperature is called the thermoregulatory control center. So it's just got a specific name. Okay. Now the thermoregulatory control center actually has two parts to it. So it has a part for heat gain and a part for heat loss. Now, if we're too hot, it's going to go to the heat loss center because we want to decrease the temperature. When we look at what happens if we're too cold, it would then go to the heat gain center. Okay, so it goes to a different place. So this gets stimulated and it needs to send signals to your effectors. Now the effectors, we have lots of different effectors, but basically they cause you to cool back down. So the effectors are what are causing this line to go down, to decrease back to where we want it to be at 37.5 degrees. Okay, so I'm going to go through each one in turn, but for here, I'm literally just going to mention them. So the effectors here are the sweat glands. When we're too hot, we sweat, don't we? The arterioles, remember it's just a small artery in the skin. And what happens if you're too hot is they dilate, that means they get bigger, so we get more blood to the surface of our skin to help us cool down. And also, it goes to some behavioural receptors. Like, for example, you'd be likely to remove your clothes, like take a jumper off, or stretch out your posture to try and cool down, or drink a cool drink, etc. Okay, and ultimately that's going to cause your temperature to decrease back to normal. So on the next slide, I'm just going to go through those cool down mechanisms, just to make sure we definitely know those. So the first one is sweating. So how does sweating happen? How does it make us cool down? So first of all, the sweat gland is activated. And then we get sweat on the surface of our skin. So if I draw our skin, say this is your arm, okay, and we get some sweat on the surface, there's some little droplets of water. Okay, now that water is going to evaporate. That means it's going to change from liquid water into water vapor. So evaporation. Now we know from secondary school that liquid water, the molecules in liquid water, if they're in a container, they're kind of touching, but they're in a random arrangement and they're moving around relative to each other, but they can't kind of float up. Whereas water vapor is a gas, so the molecules are whizzing around all over the place. Yeah, these molecules here have a little bit of energy, enough to swap places, but these ones here have loads of energy. They're whizzing around. Okay, so somehow these liquid molecules on your arm in your sweat need to get more energy in order to turn into water vapor. And the place where they get the energy from is from the heat in your blood. Okay, and therefore, if it takes the heat, or the heat is transferred from your blood into those water molecules, it leaves your blood in your arm with less heat energy, and therefore it cools you down. Okay, so here's our blood vessel. Let's label that the blood vessel in your arm. And what happens is that heat energy is transferred from the water, from the sweat, no, sorry, from the blood to the sweat. Which makes the sweat evaporate, and therefore the blood is cooled down, which cools you down. Okay, so that's your explanation of sweating. The next one we mentioned in our list was about the arterioles in the skin dilating. So let's have a look at that one. Now, the fancy word for when the arterioles in our skin dilate is called vasodilation. So vaso is like a blood vessel. Vaso, sorry, colour. Vaso means the blood vessel, and dilate means to get bigger. So what happens is the blood vessels under our skin. I don't know why it's gone straight. The blood vessels in our skin dilate. That means they get wider. So when we draw it, rather than these blood vessels being really narrow, they actually become quite wide. So quite a lot of blood ends up passing near your skin surface. So the blood running through this is coming through here. Oops, missed a line, look there, haven't I? There we go. Along these lines. Okay, so the blood vessels are wider. So lots of blood is passing near the skin surface. So the skin will be up here. Okay. So what happens is that the muscles around the blood vessel just here are the ones that control how wide the blood vessel is. So in order to get vasodilation to happen, these muscles here need to relax. which widens the entry to these little capillaries. Okay, that means that more blood flows near to the surface of the skin. And as that nice warm blood flows near the skin surface, heat is lost through the skin. Okay, so heat is transferred out of blood to the air by conduction through the skin, because the skins are solid, and then by radiation out into the air. Okay. Now this vessel down the bottom here is going to have less blood flowing along here. So if these muscles relax, it diverts the blood mainly that way. So there's less blood through this bottom blood vessel. And this bottom one is called a shunt vessel. And that's deep away from the skin. Okay. The third thing we talked about was behavioural changes. So the third one we said was changes in behaviour to cool us down. So there's not too much to think about for this one. It's quite common sense, really. No fancy processes to learn. But when it's really hot, what behavioural changes do we make to cool ourselves down? So we remove layers of clothes like coats or jumpers. Just go over it in case it asks you. It just means it's in the front of your mind, doesn't it? In terms of our posture, we tend to stretch out when we're hot and we tend to curl up when we're cold. Basically, stretching out increases your surface area, so you lose more heat. Curling up reduces your surface area, so you keep the air, keep like a warm little bit of air in your curled up part, like around your stomach, etc. Okay, so we stretch out and we drink cool drinks. Okay, so if we go back to our overview, now let's look at the opposite. What would happen if we got too cold? So let's just draw the graph in the same way, but we're going to draw the bottom section of it. So we're still going to have our norm or our set point through the middle, and our norm or our set point for temperature is always going to be 37.5 degrees C. But this time we're interested in what happens if our temperature goes below that, and how does our body bring it back up to the set point again, back to normal. Let's just move that up so I can annotate underneath. So the receptors are the same as if it went too high. So as soon as it starts to deviate from the normal, the set point, the receptors detect that. And if it's temperature, they're called thermoreceptors. That's then going to send a signal to the control center. And as before, the control center is going to be the thermoregulatory control center. Now remember that thermoregulatory control center had two parts to it, a heat loss and a heat gain. This time we want to gain heat to warm up, so it will go to the heat gain center in there. And that will send signals to the effectors, which will cause the temperature to increase back up to the normal. Okay, back to the norm. So what are the effectors then if our temperature gets too cold? So if we're too cold, we still send signals to our arterioles, but we want the opposite effect. Okay, so this time we want it to go to our arterial muscles, but instead of causing vasodilation, we want it this time to cause vasoconstriction, the opposite process, where they get smaller. Okay, we don't want to send it to sweat glands because we don't want to sweat if we're cold. We want to send it to the muscles in our skin that control the hairs on our skin, and we'll just call it muscles on skin hairs, and we'll talk about it on another slide in a second. Okay, we also want to send a signal to skeletal muscles, and that's going to make us shiver. And lastly, we need it to send it to some glands, which is going to increase our metabolism. So just like before, we'll go through each of those four processes, effectors. So this time we're looking at the effectors of if we are too cold. So the first one is vasoconstriction. So vasodilation meant that the blood vessels, vaso for blood vessels, dilate to get bigger. This one is constrict, which means to get smaller. So this time what's going to happen in our blood vessels is we've got the same kind of setup, but this time the capillaries going up here need to have less blood in. So those muscles at the start of those capillaries are going to constrict to make the capillary really narrow, so less blood goes near the surface of the skin and more of it stays in the shunt vessel along the bottom. Okay, so if our skin's up here, it's the muscles here, remember? And this time, those muscles are going to constrict. And what that's going to do is it's going to make these capillaries narrow. So therefore, there's less blood. Oops, I didn't go quite in the right place. Into there. There's less blood near the skin. And there's going to be more blood going along the shunt vessel, which is away from the skin. So if we draw the blood in, we're going to have lots of blood going this way and hardly any blood going this way. All right, which means we're going to hardly have any heat loss. Very little heat loss out through the skin because there's not very much of our warm blood next to the skin. Your skin is going to look very pale. In vasodilation, I should have said your skin is going to look really red. All right, whereas your skin is going to look really pale when you're cold. Right, the next one that we mentioned. So we've done arterial muscles, vasoconstriction. The next one is the muscles attached to your skin hairs. Let's do that one next. So these muscles are called erector hilly, long name, muscles in your skin. So basically, if you've got a hair, which we all have hairs coming out of our skin, there's our hair. Underneath your skin, if that's your skin, that hair, is attached to a little muscle. And what that muscle can do is it can contract and relax to enable that hair to stand up or sit down. So if I draw in another colour, if that muscle was to go longer, like this, if that was now that muscle, the end of this hair would then be over there, and it's like almost like on a pivot, and it would lay the hair down against the skin. Okay, so that muscle can either, sorry, I spelled muscle wrong. That muscle can either be contracted or relaxed to stand the hairs up or lay the hairs down. So when you get really cold, when the temperature falls, signals from that heat gain center cause the muscles to contract. So the contracted version is the short muscle. Okay, so these muscles contract which causes the hairs to stand on end. And basically, what that does, if I draw your skin again up here, and we draw lots of little hairs stood up, is it basically traps a layer of warm air. So all the air that's kind of trapped by those little hairs is basically trapped. So any air movement around your skin that might otherwise move the air around, the air that's kind of in between the little hairs is stuck there. And therefore, it warms up. The heat radiation from your blood under your skin is going to warm up that air, and it will just keep getting warmer rather than getting moved away and you've got fresh cold air that you need to warm up, and it moves away and you get fresh cold air you need to heat up again. The same air stays there, and the radiation from your skin just gradually makes it warmer and warmer. And what you've basically done is you've got like a little insulating layer around you, okay, of air that you're warming up. Okay, so you've got this layer of warm air. Now, this does happen in humans, and we can notice that our hair stand up on an end, for example, on our arms, but it's not a very big impact. It's much more of an impact on animals that have lots of fur. Their fur does this, and we don't have that much body hair anymore that can do this, just due to evolution. But animals with fur, this has a massive impact on how they keep warm. Okay, and it's caused by these erector pili muscles in our skin that can contract, stand the hairs up on end, and trap a little layer of warm air. Can work really well if you've got enough hair. Right, the next one on our list was that our skeletal muscles are used to make us shiver, to warm us up. So let's do that one next. So this is to do with shivering. So when you're cold, the heat gain center of the hypothalamus can send signals to skeletal muscles to make them contract and relax repeatedly. Okay, so skeletal muscle just means muscles that are attached onto your skeleton. And they just contract, relax, contract, relax, contract, relax, contract, relax, really, really fast. And this is called shivering. All right. Now, heat gets generated because each contraction needs ATP. Okay, so each contraction, each time the muscle contracts, needs ATP. And therefore, to make lots of ATP, we need to do lots and lots of respiration. And respiration releases heat. Right. So the heat comes from respiration, and we're respiring more because we need ATP. We need more ATP because the muscles are contracting, and muscles contracting, relaxing, contracting, relaxing, contracting, relaxing so fast is called shivering, and that's why it warms you up. So it's not actually the movement that warms you up, it's the respiration that's happening behind the scenes that really is warming you up. But shivering is a cause of the increased respiration, and the increased respiration then warms you up. Right, the last one in our list was glands. So one of the effectors is some glands, and we've got two types of glands that we need to know. So when you've got cold, a signal is sent to two types of glands. These glands are your adrenal glands and your thyroid glands. Now, the hormones that they make sound a little bit like the names of the glands, luckily, which makes it a little bit easier to remember. So, the adrenal gland releases a hormone called adrenaline, which I'm sure you've heard of. Okay. And the thyroid gland makes a hormone called thyroxine, which you might not have heard of. Okay. So, they produce hormones. Now, when they secrete those hormones, what they both do, what they both have in common, is they increase the body's metabolic rate. And all that means is that we get faster reactions. Your metabolism is all the reactions that happen in your body. Okay, and by making reactions happen faster, we release more heat. Okay, so just like when we have faster respiration, it generates heat, faster reactions are going to generate more heat as well, which will help warm you up and get you back up to that 37.5 degrees C. Okay, when your temperature um, gets back to normal, then that process will stop. Okay. Right, I think that covers all of those. The next thing to cover then is what happens when homeostasis, controlling your heat, goes wrong. Okay, so when thermoregulation, we call it when we're controlling temperature. So when thermoregulation fails. Okay, so your body works very hard to keep your body at 37.5 degrees, but sometimes it's just too hot or it's too cold, or for some other reason, your body cannot keep at 37.5 degrees, and then that causes bigger problems. So, if your core body temperature goes very, very low, and the definition is less than 35 degrees C, you get something called hypothermia. Now be careful with your spelling because hyperthermia is the opposite. So too cold is hypo with an O there. Hypothermia. Okay, and hypothermia can be caused by going into a very, very cold environment. So if you stayed outside in a cold place without enough warm layers on, you could get hypothermia. Okay. Um, However, there are some other causes of hypothermia, such as sometimes alcohol or really low blood sugar can either make you not produce enough heat or cause too much heat loss. Okay, so usually it's caused by a cold environment, but basically alcohol and low blood sugar can stop your control of temperature as well. So we put or alcohol, excessive alcohol, or low blood sugar. Okay, so we get hypothermia. Now, if you've got hypothermia, the first signs are going to be quite obvious. So the first signs are going to be things like you're going to be shivering. Yeah, you're going to be very, very cold, and you're going to shiver. But then we're going to get more unusual symptoms. So you might feel drowsy. That means you feel tired. Okay. If you leave it, you might then become unconscious. And if you leave it even longer, it can cause death. It can kill you. Okay. Um, Other things that you might get at the same time as hypothermia, these are kind of like other symptoms, really. One of them is called chilblains. Now, chilblains is when you get permanent damage to the little blood vessels in the skin, which makes your skin really red and itchy. So your skin is red and itchy, and it's because the little tiny blood vessels have been permanently damaged by the cold. Right, another thing that you might get is frostbite. Now, if you get frostbite, it's usually your extremities, so your fingers and toes that get affected. effectively they freeze and they get destroyed. So the tissue's destroyed. It can damage your nerves permanently, and often you have to actually have your fingers and toes amputated. So the fingers and toes, the tissue dies. Okay, and often you need amputation, which means you have to cut them off. Okay, you have to have an operation to take off the fingers or toes that have been affected. They get something called gangrene, which can then spread. So it's really important if it gets bad that they're amputated so it doesn't spread to other parts of your body. Okay, right, now the opposite is obviously if you get too hot. So hyperthermia is the opposite. That's if we get too hot. So the definition of that is if your body temperature is more than 38.3 degrees C, and we call this hyperthermia. So the cold one was hypothermia, and the hot one is hyperthermia. Okay. Now sometimes we also call this heat stroke. Now, it occurs when there's too much heat, obviously. So you can cause it yourself by something like too much exercise. Okay. Um, but mostly it's when you're exercising in conditions when your body can't control it. So if you were to do a lot of exercise, a lot of running in English weather, you're probably going to be fine. But if you do too much running in a very, very hot country or very, very hot day even, then your body might not be able to keep you cool to a safe level. Okay. So um, it's going to be, let's put, I don't think I need to put it actually. Hot conditions or a lot of exercise, you're so hot, you can't control it anyway. So you're going to get your normal symptoms of being hot. So you're going to sweat. Okay. You're going to breathe really fast. And this will remind you of like a dog panting. So the reason why you breathe uh, uh, really fast is you're trying to release that heat. When a dog pants, by the way, it's because it's almost like sweating off its tongue. The liquid evaporates off its tongue, and that really helps to cool it down. If you get hypothermia, you're likely to vomit. It will make you sick. You'll get a headache. And if it's left and it gets really bad, you might fall unconscious. Organs can fail because basically what's happening is your enzymes start to denature, so your body doesn't work properly without enzymes. So organ failure, and eventually, if you leave it, it can result in death. Now, the other thing that links onto this is excess heat can also give you burns. So obviously, if you touch something that's very, very hot, it can burn your skin. But burns can also have a whole range. So sometimes you might get a blister, but then equally burns of like if you're in a house fire, the burns could be so bad that they kill you. Okay, so burns do have a whole range through from just a blister through to needing amputation if a large part of your body is burnt and damaged and isn't working anymore, through to death if it's really, really bad. Okay, so that's the end of that video. That covers everything you need to know to do with homeostasis of temperature. But don't forget that homeostasis can be also of blood glucose level and water levels, which is covered in other videos.